where is the healthcare messaging issue falling short? You know, so many of us understand the importance of this issue, and we have all the data and everything, and yet it's falling flat, and there are people pushing against it. And it's not just healthcare. I mean, we have it in immigration, we have it on progressive taxation, we have it on climate change, we have it on all sorts of areas, and we tend to like give people information and expect them to understand why we want these things to happen, and it gets frustrating. And so what we kind of talked about was that George Lakoff is pretty renowned for his work in messaging progressive issues. So we decided to go back to that. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's the only source or he's right on everything. We just wanted to start by presenting this, some of his ideas about how we can go about this effectively. And we hope this is an ongoing thing, because if we got into it, we realized if we're going to build a progressive movement, we have to do what conservatives have done for decades. We have to learn to communicate our frames based on our beliefs and our morals, and they've been doing it for decades, so they're way ahead of us. And I'll give you some examples of how you know that.
We're not supposed to talk about their examples.
This group is data-driven. They can handle it. And we hope that this will be, as I said before, useful information in talking to legislators during the legislative session, in talking to voters as we canvass, in just talking to people that we know in our daily lives, and helping people to understand where we're coming from and hopefully identify with the things that we're passionate about. Frames, so much of our thinking is subconscious, and when information comes in, our brain is just automatically comparing it to the information, the morals, the beliefs that we have. We're not even always aware of it. And so what happens is that people will often just reject information because it doesn't match with the frames that they have internally. And what George Lakoff, one of the key foundational concepts he has is that conservatives and progressives have very different moral structures in their thinking. Then it's a spectrum, so you have people who are biconceptual, that he gave the example of a parent who may be very progressive and nurturing, and I'll get into the specifics about what those conservative and progressives are in the next slide, but know that there are people who may be one progressive, like a nurturing parent at home, and maybe a school teacher that is very authoritarian in their classroom. But the reality with conceptual people is that they're not on the conservative end, and there are progressive aspects to their way of thinking that we can appeal to. And another key thing that I found very interesting that I think helped me, he says people don't vote their self-interest, they vote their identity and their values. So if they have an established view of who they are like, who believes what they do, they're more apt to vote along those lines because they've already sort of maybe rejected things that we think are in their self-interest. So that's where they're going with their deciding how they believe and what they're going to vote for. I found that to be a really helpful piece of information. Explains a lot. So here, he calls the conservative, strict father model. They tend to believe that a good moral person is one who is disciplined, obedient to legitimate authority in order to pursue self-interest. And self-interest is really important here, to prosper and become self-reliant. So therefore, an indication that you are successful is that you are prosperous, because you have obeyed the authority figures and you are self-reliant. If you aren't prosperous, you may not be disciplined enough. And they believe it is immoral to give people things they didn't earn. We've all heard that. They just aren't sufficiently disciplined and self-reliant, and if they would just change that up, they would be rewarded. The rich are more moral than the people who need help, and the moral should rule. And they also have a lot of hierarchies: God above man, man above nature, adults above children, Western culture above non-Western, our country above other countries, Christians above non-Christians, whites above non-whites, straights above gays. You can start to see, how that impacts their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their attitudes towards specific policies. Now, hopefully, I suspect that everybody would pretty much identify with these. What he called the nurturant parent model. The most important thing is to seek fulfillment, and having the freedom to seek it is a strong value. Opportunity and prosperity are essential, or your freedom is limited. But it's not prosperity in the same way. It's more of a shared prosperity. Fairness is a very important value. Community building, service to community, and cooperation in community are strong values. And that's reflected too in freedom, prosperity, and opportunity. We want that for our fellow members of our community, not just for ourselves. We believe that, when each of us is stronger, we're stronger as a community. And we believe in true honesty and open communication. So that's sort of a summary. Any questions on that? Does that seem valid to everybody? Okay. So, how do you go about doing this framing? We do need a language, and we need to avoid using the conservative terminology, because it's like when somebody tells you don't, and the name of his book is Don't Think of an Elephant. Well, after somebody said that, try not thinking of an elephant. So you activate their terminology when you repeat it. Mm-hmm. So we need our own language. We want to reframe out of integrity and honesty, not spin and manipulation. Does that ring true? Mm-hmm. Speak from your moral perspective at all times. Get clear on your values and the language of values. Drop the language of policy wants. And I think that's something where we fall into that a little bit. Amongst ourselves, we've established that we have this common moral beliefs and frames, and so we can talk in terms of, specific policy, and it makes sense to us. But when we're talking to people that aren't as connected to their framework, being connected to certain policies, we're better off first going to the beliefs and the frames. Mm-hmm. And the specific policies will follow. And then we also, I think we've all heard this, there's no converting people who think very, very differently from us. So our best strategy is really to talk to people who are like-minded and sort of activate this progressive thinking, this progressive language. And also the biconceptual people that we talked about, who have those pieces of progressive thinking and morals in their thinking, and draw those out and link those. Understand the beliefs we disagree with. So in other words, know where they're coming from. Don't dismiss them as stupid or bad. And then
that's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah. It is hard. It is hard. And I think, we all vent at times too. It's frustrating. But I think, when you're dealing with the world and the outside of the world and the perception that they might have of you and the way you're communicating with them, it's much more positive to understand where they're coming from, and to understand what the consequences of their thinking are, and being able to extrapolate, sort of like the policy that you are advocating for will have this result. For someone coming from my moral framework, that's unacceptable. That's an unacceptable consequence. So it's good to understand what they're thinking and also be able to extrapolate that out to what are the consequences going to be and how does that violate our moral beliefs. Let's take separating families. Some people are out there saying, well, they broke the law. We're going, but you're harming families, you're harming children, and that isn't consistent with our moral values. Does that help at all with that piece? Okay. And think strategically across issues. So if we're operating at a higher level about community and what our values are, then it does cross a lot of these issues that we're talking about. Whether it's environment or healthcare, we want people to be healthy. We want them to survive. We want them to have a good life. So those are sort of the upper level that translates into Medicare for all and dealing with our climate crisis and those kinds of things. So what we have to do, because we're behind, is we have to learn this and we have to practice this. And we didn't come in as subject matter experts. We came in as people who were interested in this topic, thought it might be important to the group, and so we're learning it as we go. So
even in our conversations with each other, we would catch ourselves getting bogged down in the details and moving away from the frame. So the whole idea is, later on we're going to show you some frames, and I will see some frames, and I will have an emotional reaction to that frame because I have a personal story that hits me in the heart. Right? So the idea is your frame isn't specific about a specific plan or a specific candidate or a specific anything. It's about, this is my belief. This is the frame that frames all my actions, right? So I think you'll find that when it would be really good to practice this because it's really easy to either respond to a question and get into the details, or to get bogged down in the details just to explain it, right? But this is about backing it up and starting with the frame, and then if you are having a conversation it may naturally go into more detail, but the start has to be the value frame, and so we're going to practice that a little bit together. But even talking to each other, knowing that this is the work we were doing, it's really hard. It's not something that comes easily, so we're trying to challenge ourselves to do that together.
And practice it. I think we're gonna, if we introduce this topic once in a while, and there's more to the book, this is just the first few chapters, we'll get better at it.
I was reading the Lakoff book in preparation for this, and he says that conservatives repeat their moral values much more, and the more we hear them, the more people become comfortable with them. And it's just like the more you hear something, the more you believe it's true. Absolutely. Where we as progressives don't seem to repeat our moral values very often, and when we do, this is my take on the thing, oftentimes we feel like, oh, they're gonna view me as a bleeding heart liberal. I have to kind of change a little bit of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people do have our moral values, but they're just not hearing them as much.
They haven't connected, right. We don't have the language and attaching it to specific things that are impacting our lives. And thank you for pointing out that repetition thing. I mean, we've all seen that, how many times a Republican, for example, in an impeachment hearing, might repeat something and try to get people just to accept it as fact, even though it really isn't. So definitely an important thing. Thank you, Bonnie. Yes?
There's a difference in the value, the frame from each side too, because we might have a value frame of compassion, but because their value frames are that based on that hierarchical authority, they can change. So even though compassion might be important to them, if the person who's in the authority position does something that is not compassionate, then it's okay because that person supersedes whatever definition we have for compassion. That hierarchical authoritarianism is really a crucial difference.
Thank you so much. My husband and I have been practicing this the last several days, watching the impeachment hearings and going, but this goes contrary to what seems to be your values, but Trump is the authority figure.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much that shifts to not cross the authority figure. Thank you.
I find that's particularly relevant when you're talking from the frame of your spiritual or religious beliefs, that you may both be claiming to be approaching it from the frame of Christianity, say, and there's compassion, and then there's authority, and if they're the boss, you pay attention to them, whether their values appear to be Christian or not. That,
Right. There are different forms, interpretations of Christianity.
Of course.
Alicia.
One thing I've noticed that's really interesting is how much the hierarchy system is generally true. Like, they do have a hierarchy when you think of conservatism, but there's also exceptions that happen quite a bit. For instance, while a judge or a cop is obviously someone that would be higher up in the hierarchy, but if they do something they viewed as disfavorable against their values, then they can disregard that, and that happens all the time. And so it's very confusing, and I think ultimately, my opinion would be is that they kind of come from a place of fear. So when, like, Seattle is dying, for instance, doesn't pick up here, but it scares the crap out of people in rural areas. So I think it's kind of a combination of, they do have a value system and a hierarchy system, but ultimately I think what drives those two is fear. Like, their messaging is all very dark and very negative and othering and fearful. And
I think you're right, and I think John Dean pointed that out some years ago in his book, that the authoritarians tend to be more motivated by fear. And that's a very powerful thing. If you want to control somebody who is fearful, that's a very powerful thing. Richard?
From the other direction, this is a matter of bullying. That a lot of what's going on with the Republicans in Congress, as I see it, is that they are fearful. But the reason they're fearful is because there's this incredible bully who has established himself as the authority through his bad behavior, not through the kind of authority, say, the Dalai Lama has.
But he also claims that he's very rich.
Well, yeah, he claims lots of things, but all of those are aspects of his trying to trash the people that he wants to adulate him.
Yes, because he doesn't seem to have any qualms about.
So he works by making them fearful, which is bullying.
This goes back to the whole idea of this being neurolinguistics, right? So if you're afraid, you act from a place of fear, right? So you're going to follow your leader. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. If you have suddenly discovered that you are following someone who is immoral, then you have to, in order, just because of our psychology and our ego preservation, we have to suddenly say, oh, that's not immoral. We have to redefine immorality just to live with ourselves. So we're talking about deep-rooted psychological cascades of thought and cascades of feeling, and it's been going on for years. So pardon me?
Centuries?
Yes, exactly. So when I met with some of the people in the health and wellness group to kind of start thinking about the health and wellness portion of today's presentation, we were talking about fear a lot, about the overlay of fear and how important that is to talking about big change, right? And so I found that quote from FDR. You'll see it in the presentation later, and it basically, at that time, there was isolationism, there was tariffs, there was anti-immigration sentiment. There were all these things. These same things were happening. People were afraid, and they were doing some of the same things they're doing now. So we're talking about some pretty deep-rooted, playing on those fears and playing on human nature and playing on the way our brain has to process all the information. I mean, this is pretty heavy-duty stuff. So that's why we want to commit to that, framing it simply, and then building anything else that comes after on that, but it's gotta come from that value-based frame, and also, there is some common ground, so we don't have to only have these conversations with progressives, we just have to train ourselves to have these conversations from a value frame first, and then the details come later. So I think that all of this, the fear, the ego preservation, all of that is just a big part of what we have to do with this work.
Thank you, that's excellent. Yes.
Oh, I was just gonna make a comment, like, accountability is the weird thing that will go across like both sides, the left and right will identify, but then there's all these other things that make it I've talked to many conservatives over the years, and one of the things that is very strange to me, defies logic sometimes, is that they will respond if you talk to them about things like honor and integrity, because those are supposedly things that are rooted in like old school conservatism, and those are ways that you can reach people. Unfortunately, there's a lot of static noise in the background that makes that increasingly hard.
Yeah.
Vicki, you had something.
Well, like you said, I don't know why it's taken the Democrats so long to do this. Because, you know, when Nixon was impeached, and it was Gingrich right after that, they were so worried about their party. And he wrote that little handbook on messaging and language, and it was all built around fear and emotion. And they've been using that ever since.
It's true, and Lakoff even points out in this updated version of his book that he handed a plan to the Clinton campaign in 2016, and they just went off and did something else,
Yeah.
and Obama,
Tried.
and CA, and that kind of thing, and I'm gonna just finish real quickly, go through an example in the taxation realm, and then hand it over to healthcare, but I think you'll see, I mean, my example goes back to Reagan. So just to finish this, be proactive, not reactive. So if you're, instead of like arguing with them, if you are coming from your frame and talking about something, I'll tell you, just in the last few days doing that, I'm feeling a lot less stress. I'm not feeling like I'm up against the wall and I'm arguing in their terms. I feel just more positive.
Liberated.
Liberated. It's a more positive way to approach it. And it doesn't feel as hopeless. So anyway, I hope that might maybe be an outcome of learning the skills. And let's see. And then another important thought, don't move to the right. It alienates the progressive base and helps activate the conservative model by conceptual voters. And I think we all have felt that. This is wrong. We need to stick with our progressive values because we see in the last 3-4 years how those progressive values have become mainstream. Over half the nation now wants healthcare for all, wants all these things that were extreme 3 years ago.
Often we're told to seek common ground with the other side. What you're saying is that's not productive.
Not on issues. Find the common ground on your moral frame, and the issues will follow. Does that?
Yes, it does.
That's what I'm
It's
getting.
a starting place. The common
Yeah.
ground is a starting place, but you don't waver.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this is the fun.
I like the graphics. Nice job.
So we had some examples. I wanted to point out that so many people's attitude about taxes does go back to Reagan, when they said that taxes are bad, private entrepreneurship and supply side economics is good, social conservatism and unofficial endorsement of Christianity is essential to national well-being. Around the world, America should speak loudly, carry a big stick, and never be afraid of using it. And this was the message that Reagan and the leadership of the Republican Party just ranted on with Republicans, and particularly those who wanted to run for office. They said, do this and you will win. And you can see how that's built into sort of an unquestioning, and we call it dog whistles sometimes, when they can just say a couple of things and people understand all of that. And that's what we haven't done as good a job. I'm sure we can come up with examples of places that progressives have done that, but they've done it more extensively, more expansively, and we need to catch up. So this I love because it says, our parents invested in the futures, ours as well as theirs, through their taxes. And notice the repeated use of the word invested. They invested their tax money in interstate highway system, the internet, the scientific and medical establishment, our communication systems, our airline system, the space program. They invested in the future, and we are reaping the tax benefits. The benefits from the taxes they paid. Today we have assets, highways, schools, colleges, the internet, airlines, that came from wise investments they made. So hopefully that's a little bit illustrative of one possible, and I have a few more. If anybody's interested during the workshop on doing taxation, I have a couple more too. And then the only other thing that I'm gonna pass on to you at this point before healthcare takes over is, he talks about progressives coming from a variety of different priorities. And I think, again, I don't think some people are, strong in one area. A lot of us can identify in different areas. But the point that he made in identifying progressives who come from different priorities or different ways of thinking is that we need to work together. He points out that years ago, conservatives decided that if they worked together, no one of their subgroups, their priority groups, was going to get everything they wanted, but they were all going to get more if they worked together. And I think, we've all called for let's work together, let's not damage the other presidential candidates, we need to stick together. And I think this for me really was confirmation of exactly why we need to do that, why we need to prioritize. So I will turn it over to you.
Ron?
While I'm really on board with our consideration of our cognitive framework, understanding what's being said, and framing information, I'd like to point out that Republicans have some things that we don't have. Some strategies. For example, disinformation. Doesn't seem to bother anybody.
Russian bots?
Focusing on getting power. That's not where we're coming from.
No.
Using fear as a strategy. What do? We would call each other out as being hypocrites, right? We need to also think about not only how we think about these issues and how we frame them to other people, but what kinds of strategies, because just giving facts doesn't work.
Yeah. So I like this picture of the brain's, your neural pathways. So what we're talking about is neurolinguistics, because we're talking about, a lot of times we're doing logic. We're trying to fight emotions and fear and all kinds of the things that Ron is talking about with logic, right? And so that's again why we need to start from that value-based, emotion-based, amygdala-based frame. We are thinking, feeling people. I mean, human beings are wired this way, hardwired this way. And so we're not going to make any inroads, unless we really are activating the brain in an emotional way. So I think that when we move through the slides, I mean, some of these slides just really hit me in my heart, and they actually give me an emotional reaction. And when I am activated in an emotional way, I act differently. And when you act from, you remember the compass we've talked about sometimes, the believing, feeling, believing, thinking, acting. Like when you are in that place, that's where real change happens, and where you have the energy for the work that we have ahead of us. So I like to start with this picture just because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about capitalizing on the way our brains work and the way we function as human beings, and trying to use that to strengthen our position. Let me find the arrow key here. All right, so because of the effect of language and imagery on the brain, the constant use of one's ideological language over the others has enormous effect on our politics. We've already talked about this. Conservatives have done a better job of getting their language into the public discourse. almost to the point where we are even sometimes using their language to defend ourselves. So we need to move away from that way of acting. Did you?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Would you like a clicker? If so, I'll
The
tell you.
clicker wasn't working.
This is a different clicker.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, please continue.
So again, this is sort of the starting point for the conversation today. We need to use language that intentionally, intentionally taps into the deep-rooted neurocognitive structures of a progressive base and bi-conceptual moderates. I love the idea of the bi-conceptual moderates because I was raised by independents, right? And so so sometimes every now and then I catch myself, having some of that way of thinking. So this would include moderate Democrats, independents, and moderate Republicans. There are people who are not, full-on patriarchal that we can reach. So here's a conservative construct, okay? Patriarchal, hierarchical. We are not going to have much sway with these folks. These conversations aren't going to go well. They're going to be uncomfortable, right? So this is my position on this. We will not be baited by their language or repeat their arguments. That's where we start. We're not going to. None of the frames today are for them.
Do you have an example of a language we might fall into if we don't watch ourselves?
Some of the best. So healthcare, definitely.
What do you
It comes up a
think
lot in
is
healthcare. But how about this one? They made up the term climate change because they thought it sounded better than global warming. Now everyone says that because they're like, oh, it's just change, and so basically, the examples in climate and environment where there were tons, there are lots and lots of examples. So if you read the book, there's tons of stuff in there, super practical.
This is Lakoff's.
Yes, he's got several books.
Right.
But he's a neurolinguist. He actually is a very progressive neurolinguist. So he came at this from the brain research, and then it helped to make sense of the political world we
And
live
you're
in.
mostly doing Don't Think About an Elephant. That one.
Though I
The Little Blue
actually started off with the Little Blue Book. I didn't have Don't Think About an Elephant, so I had the book, the Little Blue Book.
It's this one.
That one, and then after I started engaging in the work with Liz, I got this book, and I
Which
found
is what? I
it's
can't
called
see it.
it's the new Don't Think About an Elephant.
Oh,
He
okay.
updated it in
The
2014.
updated one, yeah.
Thank
Still
you.
before the election. He has another book that I have not read that came out in 2016.
Yeah.
So here's the biconceptual moderate values, okay? This is morality, hard work, freedom, prosperity, and I added common ground. These are people who might be moderate Democrats, corporate Democrats, independents, moderate Republicans that are looking for something else, right? Who we can talk to about this. And it's on the healthcare is on the debate stage every time there's a presidential debate. Everyone is thinking about this and talking about this. So some of the terminology we really need to. This is our time. This is our time to really talk about healthcare for all. Did you want to talk a little bit about our progressive values as our starting place for our frames?
Okay.
Bonnie,
So-
could you stand a little closer to the screen so I can get you in there?
Come on, Bonnie.
Alright.
Little bit closer there.
Just get here.
Thank you.
So, our progressive values are freedom, and that means, freedom not only for ourselves, but for everyone. It's we not only take personal responsibility, we take responsibility for other people in the community. Fairness, which certainly, you can relate that to healthcare because the way it is right now, it isn't fair that, some people have great insurance and other people can't afford medications, and honesty. We believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and health and wellness for all. And that means everybody, not just people that could afford insurance, not people that are working, not people that are just 65 and older and get Medicare, everyone, children, immigrants.
I crafted this slide this way because we're kind of going for the freedom frame at this point. We're basically saying that in order for us all to be free, right, we have to build things differently, right? So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are completely dependent upon some of our progressive ideas, right? So I think that I kind of wanted to use that freedom frame as a foundation for some of the healthcare frames.
And the whole idea that if we have a healthy community, we have a more successful community, and we are all connected. And the conservatives don't believe that. But I'm not supposed to say that.
So I actually found a freedom frame, you see? An actual freedom frame. So I think that this is brave work, actually. I think this is really hard and work. We have to be brave. We have to stay the course. And man, I really started revisiting some of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's work. And I mean, he had another speech with the 4 freedoms. I went and looked that up after Ron told me about it, and that was considered that was the foundation for the UN's human rights. What's it called? The Declaration of Human Rights for the UN. The 4 freedoms. And so when we first started talking about this, it's a little scary sometimes because some people are concerned that the Medicare for All conversation is going to lose us the election. And I feel like as long as it's on the debate stage, we have to fearlessly talk about this. And it doesn't have to be any one candidate's plan, but we have got to change how we do healthcare. And so I think we need to be brave, and we have the right to be free from fear. And so I wanted to have this right up there front and center.
There's a history teacher at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, I believe, or maybe it's Appleton, that points out that while the 4 freedoms were, everyone in this country seemed to agree in the late 30s and the early 40s, by the time we were at the end of the Second World War, big corporations, business, had appropriated and redefined what the 3 of those freedoms really meant.
Here are the 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms that he outlined were freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Those were his 4 freedoms. And I actually went and looked at the UN documents. Oh, it was so awesome. I actually thought about bringing a copy of it. But it's amazing work, and so I think this is good stuff. Really good stuff. They were freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom of want, and freedom from fear. And I would recommend going to the UN site and looking at the Declaration of Human Rights.
Also, during this time, during the Depression, people were running to the banks and taking out all their money, and it was like a visceral reaction, from fear. And we kind of see the same thing now with people just being so fearful, like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my Primera or my whatever, what am I gonna do? And so they react in fear. It's always, it's a fear of loss.
I saw a couple hands.
So I've seen this quote that's on the board here, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, my whole life, and it feels different to me now in view of what we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Because it just sounded like a nice thing to say before, but now it sounds like when people have fear instilled in them by a politician, by their teacher, by their preacher, they will behave in ways that are dangerous to themselves and to everyone around them. And so that fear can destroy a society.
It can. It might. If we don't fight back, right? Yeah. It's very, very powerful. And also, this is in between World War I and World War II. And it was also considered, it was used also to kind of help Americans realize we can't let what's happening, overseas continue. It was also, we can't be isolationists. We have to be part of a global society that says no to fear and hatred. So it was part of that too, and part of the Depression, and also was part of the New Deal, all kinds of wonderful things. But I mean, the more you delve, there's just some really wonderful things here, and we can do it again. So this is one of our frames for healthcare, moving into healthcare now.
Everyone's life and freedom depends on everybody having access to quality health care. The most efficient and effective way to guarantee this right is to expand and enhance our existing Medicare program to all Americans. It's guaranteeing a right. It's not, this statement looks at healthcare as a right, not as a commodity.
I'm sorry, Bonnie, is that a quote? Or is
No, these are some of our frames. We're
These
moving
are our
now
frames.
into the frames that I have a few,
They come from our moral standpoint.
So we were asked to kind of, because healthcare is such a front and center issue right now, the health and wellness group was asked to just try to come up with some frames to share with you guys as examples of the work that we are all engaged in all of our social justice issues. So these are just some frames. And then I thought what we could do is we could read the frame, and then maybe there could be some discussions about how that sits with you, how it resonates with you. Maybe we could discuss as a group, because I want this to be interactive, how if it's a life and death frame, or it's a freedom frame, or a prosperity frame, or what framework that some of these quotes might come from. So this one kind of has it all. Let's try maybe the next one. I like that one.
Everybody and nobody else. That communicates that this is that our our progressive values, that we care about everybody, not just those can afford it, not just those that are in our socioeconomic groups or our ethnic groups, but everybody.
Imagine you're talking to someone and they're pointing out issues about this, and we want to, this is our belief. You could go back and ask them, well, do you believe people should just starve if they don't have enough money? Do you believe people should have to live on the street just because they don't have a job? You know, pull their, show the extremes, so this does not seem extreme.
So the challenge with that, my first thought with that comeback is that the hierarchical folks are going to say, you know,
Iron mind.
right. So we have to be careful. I think we should say that, but I think that if we want to frame it, we say everybody prospers when everybody has health, right? If everybody's in, everybody is going to be healthy, and our health is our wealth.
But assuming we're not talking to a conservative,
Yeah.
it's also fair.
Yes.
It appeals to our sense of fairness.
Yes. So basically, yes. So if you're talking to a progressive, you can talk about the fairness, and you can talk about the community.
But the argument you always hear is, I don't wanna have to wait in line for services. I can get whatever I want right now. Why would I want that?
So again, we're not going to fall into that trap. Because I believe that it'll all work itself out once we really commit to this work. Because if we invest and we create the workforce and we create, we know that this is totally doable. So if you're going to get bogged into the details of that comeback, I would just go back to.
But they'll say, well, in Canada, they have it, and you have to do this, or in England, it's like that, you know.
So.
And whenever they do that, I say, and have you ever asked a Canadian if they trade their system for ours? Because go ahead and do so, ask it at a Brit, and they will laugh and laugh and laugh.
That's
They
Yes.
would never trade for our system.
And when a lot of us were getting signatures for the petition for whole Washington, I would have people that say, I can't sign, I'm Canadian, or I'm from Taiwan, or I'm from Germany, and all of them thought it was a good idea. None of them thought it was a bad idea.
And they all did laugh.
It's about time.
I have some Canadian relatives who are conservative and they don't like having to wait. They come to the US to get quicker service.
So-
And they have
They
money.
have the money to
So they have
pay
money.
for their
So that's falling right into getting bogged down in the details. I would just say it's going to be American healthcare anyway. So why are we talking about Canadian healthcare?
Yeah.
We're talking about doing this in America. We'll do it the American way. That would be my answer. And I would say in Americans are going to want to invest in this, and we can afford it. I would not, I'm done with those comebacks.
So just for fun, in this conversation
Yes.
with people lately, I've been, because I didn't want to get sucked into the detailed conversation, but I just have been asking my friends, gray hairs all, hey, do you know anyone who has said, oh, I think I'll pass on Medicare? And you know, so I'm like, yeah, so it's like, it did get a few people thinking, and then.
It's
one
just like the
woman-
Canadians.
One woman said, oh yeah, no, I know someone who said he wanted to pass on Medicare when he retired. And then the man that was buying his company and taking over, he said, oh no, you're gonna go on Medicare because you want their prices.
Yeah, you do. You
He's like,
absolutely
okay,
do.
I guess I will. That's the closest I got. So I would suggest to you to help them think about it, to ask, do you know anyone who's bagged on Medicare?
That's why originally I questioned the Medicare for All terminology at first, but the idea is improve it. National Improved Medicare for All. We're talking about improving upon it, making it work for all Americans, not just 65 and older. So
And this is about access to medical.
Access.
It's not about getting the very best. If you have money, you can buy whatever you want.
and that will not change.
But access is what's so important, and Americans, this is from AOC, she pointed out that Americans already limit their health care, even if they have coverage, because they can't afford the what is that, they call it pay up front, and they can't afford the deductibles. I mean, the deductibles never do them any good, so she went 10 years without seeing a doctor.
So I didn't want to. I was so tempted. I have a whole other slide deck about how we would pay for it and how people will benefit from it. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole too far. But there's some slides later on where we talk a little bit about how we can prosper with this plan. So here's what I'm thinking I'd like to do. I have quite a few frames, and some of them are gonna generate some conversation. So how about if we read them out loud together? And then every now and then we just discuss them. Let's just try a couple of these.
And you know, we thought about doing a workshop where we break out on different topics, but if you want to just keep going with this, if we're learning what we want from this, we can, you know.
Yeah, I have a whole other slide deck.
Does anybody have a preference whether they want to break out?
I
We
think
still
some
have-
small group work would be good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I can get through the
Gives
rest of these
everybody a
slides
chance
in about 10 minutes.
Personally
great.
get involved in.
Is that okay?
Okay, sounds great.
And
So
I
let's
got
read this
a
one
couple
together.
others, too.
Let's read this one together. You are not free if you have cancer, no inadequate health insurance,
Or have no.
or have no or inadequate. Yeah, you have no insurance or inadequate insurance. Oops, the clicker's not working.
You're free to die.
Yes, you're free to.
I'm not doing this when I walk.
I'm free. It's not advancing at all.
Yeah,
I mean, the GoFundMe page.
yeah. Do we comment on these as you go, or you want to?
We can.
Well, I'm just saying that I'm not free if anyone I love has no insurance in cancer. Because all of a sudden I become, you know, this is a
Being
big
a good
concern.
Christian, I love everybody.
Another one about that.
Yeah, there's more slides where we talk a little bit about if you have a really sick health care family member, you're spending all your time negotiating with insurance companies, or the care that they really truly need has been denied to you. How in the world can you be free? So how about this one? You are not free if you have to sell your home to keep a family member alive.
Yeah.
I met people when I was collecting signatures
Oh, yeah.
that did this.
Yeah.
I've met many.
So when we were looking over something, I have goosebumps because I've met people, I know people who've gone through this. This is devastating.
Right.
I'm sorry, some of these are gonna be hard. They're hard for me.
Everyone.
Deserves access to healthcare they need to survive. This is a life and death issue. Comments?
Well, because I ride buses a lot, then the people who ride in buses with me, some of them are in really desperate straits. And so I'll hear their conversations about what appointments they're going to, what friend of theirs died recently, because, you know, they had a lot of undiagnosed things going on with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, rationing care and postponing care kills people.
Well, and you listen to these parents who have children who are born sick with cancer, or a single person who gets cancer. And like I was making a comment a moment ago, somebody gets cancer, unless it's their spouse's insurance. I mean, if I got, as a single person, if I got sick with cancer, right, my job's gonna go.
Yep.
And that means my insurance is gonna go.
Yeah, even if your spouse has good insurance, you might find something's not covered.
That's right.
Like the thing that's gonna save your life.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
That's
it's-
right.
It's life and
Yeah,
death.
and people usually choose to save their life.
Yeah.
And so that means their energy focusing on getting well or focusing on accepting the diagnosis, the energy is spent on arguing with insurance companies and, selling things and living a life of lesser quality because you can't afford.
Alicia?
Well, this is kind of personal for me as well, because we have had, just recently this year, we had a family member die because they had heart issues, they were diabetic, they were undocumented, and therefore did not have access to the care they needed, and was not able to get that care before they passed away. But I think that's really important to talk about when we frame healthcare, to frame it as everyone, not just.
Yeah. All the plans out there and any plan that I would support would include every single person, no questions asked.
Medicare for all does.
Because healthcare is a human right.
Healthcare is a human right.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Hardworking people shouldn't go bankrupt or lose their home due to medical costs. Every day, Americans are forced to decide to pay prescriptions or paying their mortgage.
Buying food. I think most people don't get this. They somehow think they're covered until they get sick. Just like the argument when Obamacare came up. Well, I'm healthy and my adult sons are healthy, so why should we have to buy health care? I mean, they just were like, oh my God, you're so stupid. But anyway,
Yeah.
until you've been faced with a cost, you're very naive about what it really is.
So that's another thing that we're not doing often enough is we're not sharing. So basically, you take the frame and then you share personal stories. So like one of the things that really fired me up was talking to people who, having my own stories, of course, but also talking to people. There's so many people I cannot unknow what I know. I cannot ever go back, ever, because people are suffering and people think they have insurance until they find out they don't, or until they're hit with out-of-pocket expenses that go way beyond their ability to pay because there was something that they didn't really understand. So this is a big giant deal. We have to share our personal stories more often.
Well, not only that, it's kind of like, I can't remember what state it was, but there was some state, Louisiana or some off-ball state, where a hospital, if the person couldn't pay their bill, it could be a $300 bill, they were suing the person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I read about that.
That is absolutely happening in
It's
Washington. We have very
all over the
hard
country.
usury laws.
Yeah.
And the collection companies people
They're
owe
aggressive.
$300, next year they owe $1,700, the year after that they owe $10,000.
Ron, did you want to say something?
That's the University of Virginia's hospital.
That's
And
right.
the people that have brought it forth and are pushing against it are doctors in that system.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's important to recognize that
The doctors are
people in the
horrified
system
too.
have to fight against it.
Yeah.
I believe I signed a petition related to that online.
Did I see another comment over here? I have a few more.
Every day.
When for-profit insurers design care in order to maximize returns, they deny you life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's your freedom frame and your
use
life and death frame.
We use for-profit insurers rather than insurance companies, or what's the other one? Marketplace
Yeah.
insurers. It's really important to put the for-profit out there.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
isn't for profit anymore,
Yeah, what we talking about this now?
besides Medicare?
Well, you know what? They try to act like they're not. I'll tell you, they're shaking in their boots because people are getting pretty upset, and so I think the for-profit language is very intentional. Before you guys leave today, I don't know if I have quite enough for everyone, but this is sort of the Medicare for all do's and don'ts, and it talks about very specific things like using the words for profit, and there's certain words to avoid and words that, because the idea is when we use certain words, we're actually promoting their language, and so we have to really make sure it's really clear. These people are profiting from our pain. These, not the people who work for the insurance companies or the insurance for-profit insurers, but the CEOs and the shareholders. And so we have to say it like it is, because there are people who, the biconceptuals are going to be maybe swayed, and our base will be more activated. I've got a few more. When for-profit insurers deny you care in order to maximize returns, they're interfering with the patient-doctor relationship and your individual freedom. Trying to stretch myself a little bit away from the progressive construct into the liberty and construct a little bit here, but I'll tell you what, I don't want anyone telling me, what's right, what's right for me.
Well, this
or my family.
happens all the time. A doctor will recommend a test or a procedure, and then they will have to check it out with your insurance company before you can actually go for whatever it is.
Yep.
And actually, this might entice some people that are conservative because they like to keep everything private. So, and if an insurance company is interfering with that, that might, be a talking point for them, I'm thinking.
And maybe it relates to the talking point that I know conservatives bring up, or the medical establishment brings up about, you don't want government interfering with your health care, right? Well, I don't know.
Insurance companies instead.
Insurance companies are not that much better, pardon me.
Right.
And?
We've also heard the candidates pick up the talking point of, I've heard patients who really like their doctors. I've never heard a patient say they really like their insurance company.
Yes.
And that's been a good differentiation.
Write that one down.
Yeah. You may love your doctor, but do you really love your insurance company?
So another phrase that I think that we need to use more is all doctors and hospitals will be in network.
Right.
We take, how about that? I mean, that was a slide that I had in there and I took it out in there, but the bottom line is all doctors and hospitals will be in network. You don't have to wonder. And you can go to any state, you can go to, you just get the care you need.
Don't you need to have that if they meet this minimum standard?
Yes, but at the same, but there's gonna, I think that
this is what we ran into with the Obamacare thing, where you're saying you can keep your insurance policy.
Yeah. Well, this is
But it was only true if it met the minimum standard.
Yes, so
If it actually covered anything?
So I think that's when we're slipping into the details of the plans, but most plans that I've seen have almost all doctors, all doctors and hospitals will be, including, and actually most of the plans out there include naturopathic medicine, dietitians, chiropractic, acupuncture. I mean, so that gets us bogged down in the details, but the bottom line is that no one should be telling you who you can go save for care.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I've heard is people will complain, well, Medicare, doesn't, why would you want Medicare? It doesn't even cover dentistry or eyeglasses. And I always tell them, well, Medicare for All does.
Yes, it does.
You look at Jayapal's, you look at Warren's, you look at all the Bernie's, you look at all the Medicare for All out that.
Yeah. So that's why I'd like to kind of think of these ideas as like separate from the plans, because basically any plan that's going to actually fit our frame and that's going to go anywhere is going to address all that.
Yeah.
So trying not to get bogged down in the details, but the bottom line is all the plans that fit my frame are going to cover all that.
Yeah.
And another thing that I heard when I went to the work group is there's a big tribal, there's several people that are there from the tribes, and they're also saying that we really need to redefine what would be considered standard or what covered, so the idea is it's between you and your doctor, right? And I think that we're going to sort that out when we do get into the details, but right now we just need to get the ball moving, right?
What do you argue when they say, oh, it's gonna cost too much, or the taxes will be too high, I don't wanna pay for other people?
It's an investment. Our health is our wealth. So there's some slides on that, and also I have a whole other slide deck So this group, of course, because we are already kind of the base, you know, we could probably safely delve into the Medicare for All math, and I kind of came prepared with some slides along those lines in case people wanted to go there with us. But it's an investment. It's a, 95. How about this? 95% of Americans will save money.
Wow,
If-
that's a good one.
If you ask somebody how much their monthly cost is on their medical and their deductibles and all the costs that they pay, their taxes will not go up.
No. See, I have in my math slide deck, we talk about basically even the Koch brothers Mercatus estimates show us saving $1 trillion or something, a big number.
Yeah, over 10 years.
Yeah, a conservative, the Koch brothers study shows us saving saving money.
Is that because it takes insurance companies out?
It's because all the money's just being moved from one bucket to another bucket. It's basically all the money that's going into our current system would go. We'll get to that. If you want to see those slides, I have them.
I want to say that on wholewashington.org, go
It's
to
not
their
only insurance
calculator.
companies, it's
What's
the
it?
pharma and,
Excuse me, on
Sorry.
wholewashington.org, they have a calculator where you can see what your costs now are compared to what your costs would be if we were paying with payroll deductions for people and the businesses would be paying their deductions for you. So it'd be like working like a 401k, right? Businesses pay this much, you pay that much.
If people are interested in delving into the math, I think that's something that you could join our health and wellness group, because maybe that's something I think we're going to be putting our heads together on, because we really need to make sure we're really being clear about that, because it's not one plan or another plan, but it's basically we want to really talk in these terms so people understand that this is not pie in the sky. This is really possible.
Just real quickly, one of the things that I think, and I haven't fully developed this, but I've been telling people we can afford whatever we want. We are a wealthy nation, and if we prioritize people's health and the quality of life and all of those things, we need to be allocating money, sufficient money there.
right?
You know, the specifics
investment.
come later. We invest a lot of money in defense and things like that don't reflect those values. So if we go back and say there's plenty of money, it's just, are we going to take care of people? Or are we going to throw it out the window in some other way?
Here's I wasn't going to go here, but one of the slides in the math slide basically says, why is it you never ask the pay for it question when it comes to trillions for endless wars, bank bailouts, or tax cuts for the wealthy? But somehow our pockets are always empty for everyday Americans. So that is a little preview of the math slide deck. That we will.
And there's a whole website created by a graphic artist that has wonderful.
Yeah. Let's keep going, because I know people want to talk about the environment and progressive taxation. So Medicare for All will give you freedom to make medical decisions with your family and care team rather than your insurance company. I feel like we already talked about this one, but this one actually really hits me a little bit, because my mom was kicked out of her rehab center when she couldn't even get out of bed. And she was completely nonverbal against the advice of her entire care team on Christmas Eve. And my dad paid out of pocket for her to stay for 5 days. She didn't even have, we don't even have a bathroom on the main floor of the house. We didn't have we had nothing. I mean, and she came home and I'll tell you that her health outcomes were terrible, terrible. And she had awful bed sores because my dad couldn't move her, and she couldn't move herself. Against the wish of her entire care team, because of the insurance company's formula. It basically said, you've used up your time. This is how much we allot for this. So I'll tell you that this slide, even though it doesn't seem so emotional, this one, I'm not crying, but I often get really upset when I talk about this, because we were devastated by insurance companies making decisions for my family.
I think the big gap, I'm a retired medical social worker, the big gap is people don't
Need
get
you
that.
on our team.
That your long-term health care is not your nursing home care is not covered. It's I'm not rich for that. Nobody says, oh no, I've got Medicare. It's like,
No.
Yeah. And my mom was 50 years old when she had her, 55 years old when she had her stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, this is a heavy duty stuff for me. So, how about this one? This is for the entrepreneur and the small business owners. Medicare for all will give you freedom to change jobs, start a business, care for your family, or move without risking your health coverage. Portability is huge. We could innovate if we weren't constantly shackled to our employer.
I think this would, appeal to some conservatives that
The
are.
start a business part.
Yeah, the business
Entrepreneurial
part,
type.
yeah, they don't wanna stay in one place, they wanna go.
They're self-reliant.
Right, exactly.
Self-reliance, good.
And also, if you have a business that has 5 or 10 employees, if they had Medicare, they could insure themselves, and you would not have to come up with a company health plan.
Yeah.
And so many businesses where people just stay in their jobs for their health coverage. And so the business is not thriving, you know, and you can't.
I point out a lot of times it's staying in their job for their child's health coverage.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if you are working along and a child is born with a severe disability, that's it, you'll never change your job again.
And even if
That's
you
my
do stay in
brother's
your job,
story.
even if you do stay in your job for that reason, a lot of the Whole Food workers stayed in their jobs because they wanted to keep their health care. Bezos bought them out and stripped them all of their health care.
Right.
So even staying in your job does not keep you.
Doesn't.
No, it absolutely does not. No one is safe from this. No one is safe from
Once
this.
your business gets acquired, that's it, new management.
Yeah.
Even same management can change insurance
Right.
policy.
Yeah.
And they could.
We're all one healthcare crisis away from this. Even the well-insured. Medicare for all will give you the freedom to enjoy time and loved ones instead of negotiating insurance problems.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and it's just, when someone is sick, you don't want to be doing this other stuff.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it brings up the picture of, I had a friend that I was visiting, it was kind of like 2 weeks before he died of lung cancer, about that. And, he had all these bills on the table, and he had, you know, I don't know that anybody knew he was gonna die in 2 weeks. He was somebody who kept rallying, but when I think of that picture, you know, he could have been doing
Something else.
something else.
That's how he had to spend his last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Also, for healthcare providers, I worked as a nurse, and I wrote another one which we didn't put up there, but Medicare for All will give healthcare providers the freedom to spend more time in direct patient care.
How about that?
I worked at the University of Washington for 37 years, and, you know, we had lots of utilization people kind of making patient stays get covered. And initially, those people weren't nurses, and they even, got rid of, they transitioned them to another area, and they had nurses come in and be utilization review people because they thought they would be able to communicate, you know, better the patient's condition, and, you know, the stays might be more easily covered. But there would always be somebody, you know, where the insurance companies was fighting, no, we wanna talk to the doctor directly. And, you know, the doctor, it was terrible because, he'd be on the phone, he or she had a lot of important things to do. And they would be staying on the phone for like a half hour or more. There were no direct lines
So
to get through.
all the numbers don't even show the time wasted.
Yeah.
They only show that but you know, some numbers that crunchers would, you know, allot all that time to their hourly wage. That's where a lot of the waste is in our system. I'm starting to get worried about the time How about Medicare for all? Will give you financial freedom, freedom to spend your money on something other than premiums, co-pays, deductibles, and unpredictable out-of-pocket expenses. Let's see, okay, now we're getting close to the end, I recognize this slide.
So do you think that there's gonna be no premiums? Is that what you're saying?
It's gonna basically, we're not gonna get bogged down in the details, but no, it's going to be, the employer base is gonna come out of your paycheck.
Yeah,
So it's not going to be, it's gonna look like premiums, but we're not gonna call it premiums because it's going to be a totally different way of paying for it. And it's going to, and 95% of Americans are gonna save less. So we can't afford our current system. Medicare for all is affordable and costs are offset by savings. And Medicare for all equals huge savings for 95% of Americans. So I don't want to get too bogged down in the details of how we pay for it, but this could be a mantra for those of you who are having those quick conversations and with people and you don't have the time to really delve into it. But I do have a lot of numbers that show how we're going to pay for it. So I think we're getting close to the end. Oh yeah, do you want to show that?
Yeah. Taya, Kathleen, and Pam and I went to a meeting for Healthcare for All, and everybody got one of these cards on the table. And I'll pass it around.
I'll pass her on this side.
This side is, it has, all these lines are kind of the communication channels that have to go through to get a claim to go through in our present system.
Oh my God.
Could anybody, I mean, it just looks like a mess. It makes me want to throw up. Now this, of course, if we get Medicare for all, our channels of communication may be a bit different. But this is the Canadian system.
Oh.
This, look how much cleaner and clearer.
You can see it from the back of the room, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this kind of thing would appeal to conservatives. I mean, most of us, whether we're conservative, progressive, or independent, or, you know, whatever, moderate, somewhere in between, most people believe that, you know, clear communication and efficiency works better. Just think if any one of these lines gets frayed or somebody doesn't do that job, how long, and that
You could die.
Well, it does happen that hospital stays are prolonged, or people don't get tests, or whatever.
Right. Medicare for all is the most humane, equitable, and cost-effective way to provide health care. It is also the best way to promote sustained American growth. So Medicare for all is an investment in healthy America. Our health is our wealth. So universal health care saves lives, saves money, and saves our sanity. That was my idea. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, health, and wellness for all. I went over time, I'm really sorry, but we're heading into Thanksgiving, and so this is tips for table talk based on Lakoff's work. Basically, the idea is that if you have conservatives or biconceptuals at your dinner table, show respect for their ideas. Try to remember the freedom frame, because the freedom frame is on all constructs. So it's got to be. So that's why I started off with some of those freedom frames. Is freedom is we all believe that in freedom, right? So respond by reframing rather than getting bogged down in the details. Think and talk at the value level and say what you believe. So that's why the frames are in some ways more important than any of the details. So I thought that this was sort of my closing thought. These are the books. My understanding is that the slideshow is something that everybody will have access to after the fact. So these books are fantastic, really easy to read. You can just open up to a page and get something that you can use right away. And I think that's my last slide. Oh, these are the math slides.
They will be in the slideshow that's published.
So we can maybe if you guys want to join the health and wellness group on a different day, we can delve into some of the math. Yes.
All of those things we were reading seem like the sorts of things that would lend themselves to Facebook posts. Just putting one after another of those out there
Scrolling?
on your Facebook. No, know, just put one out.
Pick one that fits you.
Just
Yeah.
put one out there.
I think she's saying put one at a time, let's put one every day or something.
Or,
So
yeah,
we can
or
think
every
about
day.
just that one.
Yeah.
at a
You
time.
all have access to it.
All of us.
You can do with it what
Yeah.
you will,
All
but
of us, or something like this, you could take a picture of this and put them side by side.
I'm gonna see if,
Because those are the kinds of messages that are both, you know, simple and visual, and they, you know, a lot of us have people that are both conservative and progressive in our.
absolutely. I'd like to actually get a complete, like a big stack of those, because I think that is really a wonderful graphic. I have some Medicare for All half sheets for you to take with you on one